young, innocent, and she was treated as somebody special.
Ida is crying. Help me, help me.
You could see that something really bad had just gone down.
The police want to solve this, but they got this father who's on their case sometimes instead of on the case.
Her parents were just relentless about it.
It's a very tragic thing that happened to her daughter. But me and my brother are innocent.
I don't think there was anybody in the state who didn't know what was going on.
That doesn't mean the case is solved. That just means there's a lot more work that's now going to be required.
The Big Island, Hawaii. A sun-kissed playground, drawing thousands of tourists.
It's really tropical. It's really, wow, this is what Hawaii is supposed to look like.
The lower Puna area is remote, rugged, and beautiful.
Hawaii has been called a paradise, and that needs to be taken with a grain of salt.
In the shadows, there's another story of drugs, crime, and violence. It's 5 o'clock on Christmas Eve. Rich Trenda and a friend are heading home after a day of snorkeling.
Look at the bike, and you could, just see that something really bad had just, gone down recently right there. It was a fairly new mountain bike, and then just a little bit beyond the bike was a tennis shoe, and then a little bit beyond that was a clump of blonde hair sitting in the road. It was just unfathomable to think that that this could have happened. That somebody would just run over somebody else on a bike.
A few minutes later, another couple pull up.
And she said, "That's my bike."
A frantic Sandy Ireland tells Rich her sister Dana borrowed the bike a few hours earlier.
She freaked, and then not to blame her or anything. We searched the basic perimeter within a couple hundred yards all around.
There's no sign of the 23-year-old. In a panic, Sandy rushes home and calls the hospital. Dana's not there.
And then the whole family just goes, where is she? Just nervous energy, fear flooding through them.
The Big Island is home for Sandy. Her sister and parents flew into town to spend a long holiday vacation together.
So it was just a family sort of reunion.
5 miles from the bike wreck in remote Wawa, Ida Smith is in her kitchen.
I was getting dinner ready now. I just heard some crying. And I thought it was the kids next door playing games, but they wouldn't stop. So I said, well, I'll be nosy, find out if any kid's in trouble. And so I walked down the driveway, and when I got even with the house, the noise was coming from beyond the house. And so I said, well, I'll walk down to the road, go look for whoever's doing the crime. In your mind, you're trying to figure out, okay, it's not the house and there's no kids there, and this crying is from beyond that. And I'm thinking, car got into an accident, somebody's hanging over the side of the cliff, there's a lady stuck in the, you're thinking all these things. I couldn't find anybody. And I still hear this crying, help me, help me. And then I found her.
On a secluded section of Fisherman's Trail, Dana Ireland lies battered and bleeding.
Pretty terrible. She was pretty bad. The first thing I tried to do was to get her up. And I went to grab her and she started screaming. You know, she's just in pain.
It's obvious to Ida, this is no accident. Dana's been raped, beaten, and left for dead.
Her pants are pulled down to her ankles. And she had her legs together, and she's screaming to get one of the pants off her legs. You know, so I said, okay. She grabbed a hold of my hand and wouldn't let me go, you know. And I said, well, I'm going to pray. You're going to relax. Everything's going to be okay. I'm going to go home and get help. Okay. And then she let my hand go. She released me.
Wawa is off the grid. Ida has no phone service. She rushes to flag down help on a nearly deserted road. The minutes tick by. At last, a truck.
I screamed as loud as I could. I need a nurse. I need to call the ambulance. You come right away. And she goes, well, we're on our way to our friend's house who's a nurse, and we'll call the ambulance from there. Tell them to hurry up. She's really bad off. Send them right now. I was so upset.
Ten minutes later, Pune police get a call for help from the nurse's radio phone.
And there was a woman and a man on the beach road and came running out of the house who had been raised there.
It's Christmas Eve. Hardly any first responders are on duty.
So now I'm left there wondering, are they coming? You just get to the point where you feel so helpless. You know, there's nobody around, and you're just in the boonies, and you haven't got a phone, and you can't leave her, and you're just helpless, just totally helpless.
Ida doesn't want to move her. She knows this is a crime scene.
They're going to need to see all this stuff for evidence or whatever, you know, and I don't want to mess up nothing.
A full 90 minutes after Ida found Dana battered and bleeding, paramedics respond.
So they go down to the bottom of the paved road right near the shoreline, and they don't see anything right there, and now they're justifiably confused.
I'm not a physician, nurse, or whatever, but I can tell pain, and she was in pain.
Urgent radio messages fly back and forth as paramedics look for Fisherman's trail. And when they find it, an unbelievable snag.
These guys somehow got it in their heads they couldn't go in there, or we're going to wreck our truck.
The ambulance didn't come. I was so mad by that time I was livid.
7 p.m. Finally, paramedics arrive.
It took about almost 2 hours for them to get there.
Just getting her up the trail was going to be an issue. With a lot of internal bleeding going on. All the rescue people can do, all of the paramedics can do is just pump in intravenous fluids. They can't get in there and stop it.
When they put her finally in the stretcher and brought her up the trail and they put her in the ambulance, she looked at me. And I said, I'm coming to the hospital tomorrow to see you. And she goes, oh, please come. And they took her in the ambulance.
When they got to the hospital, she was in very bad shape.
Enormous amount of blood loss, fluid loss. They operated, they sewed this and sewed that.
For the next 4 hours, surgeons fight to save Dana's life.
It's right at midnight. It is the beginning of Christmas Day. And they finally do what the doctors do. They call it. They say, she's dead. And then the doctor goes out and tells the family.
This, to them, was a huge shock. I mean, how could this happen to somebody like that? Somebody who is innocent, who's never been involved in any kind of trouble at all, just out riding her bicycle.
A hit and run is now rape and murder. The question on everyone's mind, what kind of monster did this? Christmas Day, 1991. 23-year-old Dana Ireland lies dead in a hospital morgue after being raped and beaten. On Hawaii's Big Island, the brutal slaying makes big news.
Just terrible, terrible kind of thing that people could identify with. And she was blonde and young and innocent, and was just out here visiting her family.
A University of Virginia graduate, Dana was bright, athletic, and idealistic. She was planning on joining the Peace Corps.
She was such a lovely, nice, gentle person. Everybody loved her.
High-profile murder cases are rare on the Big Island. It's a huge challenge for Puna's top investigator.
Detective Stephen Guillermo. Local boy, soft-spoken, no macho cop stuff. Just do the job, keep plugging away, get the job done.
First stop for Detective Guillermo is Fisherman's Trail, where he finds some of Dana's bloodied clothes. He also finds a large blood-soaked t-shirt with a Jimmy Z logo. If he can find the man who wore it, he will almost certainly have found the man who killed Dana.
The police themselves did publicize it in the hopes that the public could give them more information.
At the accident scene 5 miles away, Detective Guillermo tries to piece together what happened. He notices the vehicle's tire marks come from the wrong side of the road, then sharply swerve.
The only likely thing that a swerve would mean is that someone deliberately swerved. It gave a high degree of suspicion that it was a deliberate intent to hit the bicyclist.
At the autopsy, Dana's body yields little evidence.
When a patient comes to the hospital, the first thing is you want to save the patient. I mean, that should be the objective. But during that time, depending on how long and what's being done, they may lose some of the evidence.
Only a very small semen sample can be recovered. Further examination of the body reveals a grim story.
Her pelvis was fractured, her bladder was ruptured. She did have a fractured clavicle. There were bleeding points in some parts of the brain.
The coroner confirms that after Dana was knocked off her bike, she was savagely attacked.
She had bleeding inside her vagina, and that was not from the accident. She had evidence of sexual assault. She had a bite mark on her left breast. It was brutal.
Why did they run her down? Did they run her down because they wanted to sexually assault her? Did they run her down because she was a blonde young woman who was vulnerable and there was nobody around as a witness?
The police learned that on Christmas Eve, Dana borrowed her sister's bike to visit a new friend, Mark Evans. Evans, a 27-year-old local, is a surfer with an eye for pretty women.
He was alone, and wouldn't it be nice to invite a nice guy to come have Christmas dinner with us?
As Guillermo questions him, he wonders if Evans is such a nice guy after all. Evans wanted to get closer to Dana, much closer. She brushed him off.
Dana was a very shy girl, not particularly interested in romance.
Maybe Evans couldn't take being rejected by a pretty girl. He has no alibi.
Probably Mark was the last person that she knew personally that ever saw her or that she spoke to.
Detective Guillermo swabs Evans for DNA and sends the saliva sample to the crime lab. With no other leads, he's forced to dig deeper into a world few tourists see. Lower Puna can be a rough place. More than just coconuts and pineapples flourish in the rich volcanic soil.
And they can grow marijuana very easily here and very cheaply, and so that was a huge, huge cash crop. It led to people ripping off other people's marijuana or ripping off the money they got from the marijuana.
Some Hawaii natives deeply resent outsiders from the mainland.
Some people come from the mainland to retire here because it's inexpensive and it's a paradise, but they bring some of their prejudices with them. You have to be careful what you say and where you say it.
Did Dana cross paths with the wrong person at the wrong time?
You start making a list. Who are the kind of people who would be involved in this kind of crime? This is going out and talking, gathering all the information, trying to get people who know something to open up.
That means witnesses. Anyone who saw Dana cycle from her would-be boyfriends to her home. Investigators reconstruct her last fateful bike ride.
You try to find out who might have been in the area at the time, what kind of vehicle they were driving, and you just slowly but surely narrow it down.
4:14 p.m. She's spotted passing Opihiko Church. 11 minutes later, she is seen at a surfing beach called Shacks.
What a beautiful place to stop and catch her breath with the surfers, with the water. It was a sunny day, beautiful.
15 minutes later, at 4:40 p.m., Dana is hit. Just a half mile from her sister's home. The road is well traveled by locals and tourists. It was broad daylight. Someone must have seen something.
They did their typical investigative practice. I mean, they did it by the book. Nobody saw her get hit.
Then, the first big break. A couple living near the crash site say they saw something.
They saw a guy with a pickup truck loading a person into the back of the pickup truck.
Eric Carlsmith says that person was wearing only one shoe. Better still, he got a good look at the guy. Detective Guillermo pulls together a photo lineup of local felons.
You gotta be 100% sure.
Eric Carlsmith says, yeah, it looks like that guy there and that guy there. Turns out to be a guy named Wayne Nasario.
Wayne Nasario and his brother own a truck like the eyewitness describes. 2 weeks after the murder of Dana Ireland, Detective Steve Guillermo has his first serious suspects.
Now, if I were Guillermo, I'd really be perking up.
25-year-old Wayne and his younger brother Andy Nasario are no strangers to the law. Both have been busted for drugs. The eyewitness isn't the only informant who fingers the Nasarios.
Guillermo gets information that describes brothers who were allegedly involved in this murder, and that one of them is named Wayne. They were boasting about getting away with murder, all from this anonymous informant.
That's not enough to indict anybody. It's just a good set of circumstances and information that you can use to put more focus on this area.
Where were you on December 24th?
The Nasarios are hauled in for questioning.
Where were you on this date at this time, and do you have anybody who can verify where you were? Can we look at your truck?
The Nasarios are evasive, and they don't have solid alibis.
We didn't do anything.
What was she to you guys?
Detective Guillermo swabs them to compare their DNA to the semen found on Dana's body. Then, another eyewitness comes forward with a totally different lead.
A community eyewitness who saw a van parked right at the same spot where Dana was hit on the bicycle, very much close to that time. And Sandy Ireland had seen the same van a few days earlier, and there were 3 men in the van.
Word spreads the police are interested in the Nasarios. Another witness comes forward. One who could lock up this case.
An informant says that he was at a party where the Nasario brothers had been present, and late on the afternoon of Christmas Eve, and he saw them get in their pickup truck and they drove away, came back 2 hours later. One of the brothers, who had been wearing a shirt with the specific words Jimmy Z on it, now comes back bare-chested, no t-shirt. They stripped the truck apart. This is it's like a flood of information now about the Nasario brothers and their link to the murder.
But to charge them, Detective Guillermo needs hard forensic evidence tying the brothers and their pickup to the crime. And the new information about the suspicious van has to be checked out. Guillermo needs to know what type of vehicle struck Dana.
They had that mangled bicycle, and they had the physical injuries that Dana had suffered. And the question is, how do you link them to a vehicle?
Police call in Ken Baker, an internationally recognized crash investigator, to examine the bike.
You have to, look at every piece and see where it fits. When you measured the damage to the bike, it indicated that whatever bumper struck the bike would have been about 12 inches off the ground. The shape of the damage on the bicycle rim was such that the bumper would have been about 4 inches from top to bottom. So we're looking for a vehicle that is very low in the front and a small bumper. It has to be a small car.
This rules out the Nasario's truck. Detective Guillermo contacts his informant. Could the brothers have been driving a small car? More bad news.
The informant just plain admitted that the whole thing was an outright lie. Never happened. The informant invented the story because he was angry at the Nasario brothers over a marijuana deal that had fallen through.
Detective Guillermo goes back to Eric Carlsmith, the witness who saw a body being loaded into a truck on Christmas Eve. Carlsmith now says he can't be sure it was a truck. Then, the investigation suffers an even bigger blow. The semen sample found on Dana is just too small to get a hit. It can't be linked to the Nasario brothers or her wannabe boyfriend, Mark Evans.
Which is, oops, that's a problem.
It was a mess in terms of evidence. It was not good.
With the Nasarios cleared, police search for small cars that fit accident expert Ken Baker's description.
Police had a pretty good idea of questioning what kind of guys driving what kind of cars. So you start making a list. Who are people who are capable of doing something like this? And I hate to say it, but Puna was full of such people.
6 months after Dana was knocked off her bike, her killer or killers are still on the loose. Fear grips Lower Puna.
The public expect immediate results in these kinds of cases, and they get frustrated when that doesn't happen.
Local women take to the streets and demand action.
There was a big uprising. A lot of people went and marched for her.
We want to get rid of these people who are a threat to other innocent women out there.
No one is more upset than Dana's father, John Ireland. 7,000 miles away in his Virginia home, he wants answers. He believes authorities have been bungling the case from the get-go.
He was very, very outspoken about what took place and what he wanted to do about it and how he wanted to take care of it. He was a curmudgeon.
The family filed a lawsuit against the county for its delays in making a timely response. Its deliberate and conscious delays by the fire rescue personnel of that day.
Dana's death devastates her family. The shy 23-year-old had her whole life ahead of her.
She was their pride and joy. Mr. and Mrs. Island, she was unexpected. It was a surprise pregnancy. And she was treated as somebody special.
A retired Army officer, John has plenty of time to track the case. he posts a $28,000 reward for information.
He went all out, as I guess you would kind of expect a person to do if their daughter had suffered the same thing that Dana suffered.
John Ireland's $28,000 bounty brings tipsters crawling out of the woodwork.
So here's this flood of tips, and much of the flood is coming from people that you might describe as lowlifes. And the question is, who can you trust? Who can you believe? Even if someone's not lying to you, who's just a sloppy observer?
Detective Steve Guillermo checks out every lead. One stands out.
An anonymous tip came in to Guillermo that Frank Pauline knew something about the case. And certainly Guillermo knew something about Frank Pauline. He was viewed as a walking crime wave.
The walking crime wave took his first criminal steps at the age of 10. Frank Pauline's done time for assault and been involved in a hit and run.
And so Guillermo followed up and talked to Pauline.
Where he was at such time, who he was with, what he was doing.
Pauline denied being involved, but he said, but there's a couple of Schweitzer brothers. I heard they're involved.
Pauline tells Detective Guillermo he's heard through the Puna grapevine that Ian and Sean Schweitzer ran Dana down. Older brother Ian then raped and beat her. Sean Schweitzer is only 16, and the brothers aren't hardcore criminals, so Detective Guillermo is skeptical.
Pauline's family had a bad relationship with the Schweitzers and vice versa.
In Puna's murky underworld, making false accusations is nothing new.
It goes on all the time. And you may name somebody because you don't like that person. You've got some kind of grudge against that person.
Guillermo knows this guy from when he was just a punk. Guillermo knows better to believe anything he says.
Detective Guillermo files Pauline's accusation against the Schweitzers and focuses on other leads. The problem is there are so many.
You had to track down leads. You had to do all of this kind of nitty-gritty stuff. It's just taking those leads as far as you can take them, and when they just don't pan out, then you jump to another one.
Months turn into years. Hundreds of people come under suspicion. None are charged. Somewhere out there on the Big Island, someone is getting away with murder. Detective Steve Guillermo has uncovered plenty of suspects in the Dana Ireland murder case, but nothing sticks, and the case stalls. 3 years after their daughter's murder, John and Louise Ireland return to Hawaii, still searching for answers. They visit Ida Smith, the woman who tried to help Dana.
And they wanted to see where I found her. So I took them down and I showed it to them. And they were a very pleasant, older couple, you know. And I said, what could I say to them, you know, which is hard.
The main reason for the Ireland's return to the Big Island is to turn up the heat on the Puna police.
Mr. Ireland was just relentless about it, and he was methodical about it. That's the kind of father I'd sure want if somebody did something to me.
When the grieving parents meet with Detective Guillermo, he has little to report.
They don't want a bad guy to go out free. They want to solve this, but they got this father who's on their case sometimes instead of on the case. And it must have been stressful for them to try to be polite, try to remember that this is a suffering father and a suffering family.
Detective Guillermo is doing all he can, but he's a one-man band in a tiny force with limited resources.
He was just constantly checking and rechecking and hoping, and not being able to nail it down, but he was not giving up, that's for sure.
Oh, it's just grunt work. It's not what you see on television. It's time-consuming, it's frustrating.
Three more long years pass. Then, a glimmer of hope. Frank Pauline, the crack-smoking lowlife police investigated and eliminated 5 years earlier, wants to talk. Pauline is now serving 10 years for sexual assault and looking for a favor.
He owes money to people. People are threatening him, beating him up. He somehow gets the idea if he at least makes some kind of statement, he can make a deal where he gets leniency for himself.
The detective agrees to meet the con.
But he's not jumping up and down with joy because he knows Pauline is a notorious liar.
He did have a reputation for giving bad tips, but he also had a reputation for being not a good dude either.
4 years earlier, Pauline pointed the finger at brothers Ian and Sean Schweitzer. With no evidence to back up the allegations, Detective Guillermo didn't believe him. Now Pauline repeats that story with a twist. He was there.
They eventually set up a tour, and they say, we'll drive you around. You tell us where to go. You tell us what happened.
Pauline says on Christmas Eve, he and the Schweitzer brothers got together to smoke crack and decided to head down to the beach.
The Schweitzers and Pauline weren't that friendly. They were not buddies, so why would they be driving around together? The answer to that is difficult, but it may have to do with drugs.
Ian, the older brother, was driving the group around in his VW Beetle. Crash investigator Ken Baker said Dana was hit by a small car, a fact never made public. According to Pauline, when they saw Dana, Ian Schweitzer made a U-turn and accelerated.
They hit Dana's bicycle with the Volkswagen, and then very quickly thereafter picked her up, put her in the Volkswagen.
Pauline tells Guillermo they headed for Fisherman's Trail, 5 miles away.
They go down this very, very isolated road with few people around it, and they find an area where they can turn off. They can actually drive the Volkswagen down a little bit off the road. They can pull her out, and they can sexually assault her.
Pauline claims he was just a bystander. Older brother Ian Schweitzer is the person who raped and murdered Dana. Pauline says back at the Schweitzer house, Ian washed down the car, warning Pauline to keep his mouth shut or die.
That doesn't mean the case is solved. That just means there's a lot more work that's now going to be required.
Pune police head for the Schweitzer's house, where they find an old VW Beetle. It's obviously been repainted.
It's suspicious. That's about all you can say. It's suspicious. You want to get more answers. You want to find out more about that.
Crash investigator Ken Baker is called back in to examine the Volkswagen.
I'm looking for the shape of the bumper to be U-shaped so that it matches the damage on the bicycle shape. I determined that the bumper height on the Volkswagen was a match for the height of the damage on the bicycle, and the shape of the bumper. You finally get to the point where, wow, we finally got something here.
It's good evidence, but limited. Baker can't find any blood or paint from Dana's bicycle on the car's bumper.
I could never really say that this was the vehicle that struck the bicycle. I could only say that it was a vehicle like this.
Together with a confession, it's enough to charge the Schweitzer brothers and Frank Pauline with kidnapping, rape, and murder. Detective Guillermo knows if he's going to make it stick, he's going to need more.
This was a horrendously difficult case for the police literally spending years on sifting through pieces of evidence.
Using cutting-edge forensic techniques, detectives get new evidence. Another semen sample is recovered from Dana's hospital sheet. This time, the sample's too degraded to confirm a match.
This monkey wrench suddenly went into the works, and the long-awaited indictment got quashed, squashed, kicked out.
The Schweitzers are released. The community is outraged. Neighborhood posters call for vigilante action. Sean Schweitzer claims he and his brother are blameless.
It's a very tragic thing that happened to her daughter. But, yes, me and my brother are innocent.
Even more frustrating, Frank Pauline recants his confession.
They believed my lies. What can I say? I'm a good liar. I cannot undo what I did. You know what I mean? I was wrong in the first place for lying and hurt plenty of people.
Pauline only did it, he says, to get back at the Schweitzers.
I just never liked them, you know what I mean? To me, they was just scumbags.
A heavy blow for the dogged detective. After 7 long years, the Dana Ireland murder investigation is right back at square one. Even worse, in 3 weeks, the statute of limitations on the Schweitzers' rape and kidnapping charges runs out.
The deadline was coming to indict these guys, or they forever go free.
Then, Detective Guillermo gets the biggest break in the entire case. Another prison inmate, Mike Ortiz, is looking for a deal. He tells the police that while they were in prison together, older brother Ian Schweitzer confessed to him.
So now this is almost like a smoking gun. This is huge.
Ortiz tells the same story of 3 crack-smoking men in a VW car, with one crucial difference. It's Pauline, not Ian Schweitzer, who went berserk on Dana, Ireland.
Pauline raped Dana, then took a tire iron and hit her on the head.
Armed with this, Detective Guillermo digs up 2 more eyewitnesses who also implicate Pauline and the Schweitzers. One tells police he was drinking with them on the day of the attack. They saw Dana bike up and look out at the ocean.
And while she's taking in the view, there's these bad guys taking in the view of her.
The witness tells them that after Dana rode away, the 3 suspects drove off in the same direction.
Another witness said that he actually saw Frank Pauline wearing this Jimmy Z t-shirt.
The same t-shirt Guillermo found drenched in Dana's blood at the crime scene. Now, police have 2 eyewitnesses, the Volkswagen evidence and the Ortiz story.
The prosecutors go back to the grand jury and get a new indictment against the brothers.
Frank Pauline and the Schweitzer brothers are charged with kidnapping, rape, and murder. With so many different stories and no DNA evidence, will it stick?
If you're the prosecutor, you don't want to say we have a lousy case publicly, but the prosecutors knew that they had a weak case.
Nine years after Dana Ireland was raped and murdered, the case against Frank Pauline and Ian and Sean Schweitzer reaches the Hilo courthouse on Hawaii's Big Island. But finding impartial jurors in close-knit Hawaii is tough.
A lot of people had friends or relatives or acquaintances who were somehow involved in this, whether police or fire or friends of the Irelands or friends of suspects. A lot of people had some sort of personal involvement with this.
I don't think there was anybody in the state who didn't know what was going on. People remember even to this day, 11 years after the trial, still asking about it. So that's an unusual thing, I think, for any judge.
The trial is a media sensation. Reporters dub it Hawaii's OJ.
Anybody who was here at the time remembers this case. It's something that just was in the news constantly.
Frank Pauline sticks to his claim that his confession was false.
I don't care if anybody believes me.
That you are a murderer.
I don't care if anybody believes me. The main thing is I'm speaking the truth. That's all I care about.
But Pauline's own half-brother testifies against him.
He told me that him, Ian, and Sean was driving, and they saw this girl on the bike, and they were giving her gestures, and when she refused, Ian got all mad, and he told Frank, well, after this, and he went and banged the girl.
What really sways the jury is when the prosecution plays an interview Pauline gave a reporter before he recanted his confession.
I couldn't sleep. I had bad dreams of the girl coming to me, telling her help, telling me help her so she can rest.
When the jurors heard Pauline's own voice talking about his own pain, I think that just must have cut them to the soul. I think they must have felt, for once, this guy is telling the truth.
After 2 days of deliberation, the jury hands its verdict to Judge Amano.
Frank Pauline Jr. was convicted of murder in the second degree, kidnapping, and sexual assault in the second degree, for which I sentenced him to life.
Ian Schweitzer is also found guilty. On the eve of his younger brother's trial, there's another dramatic twist. In return for a lighter sentence, Sean Schweitzer offers to tell prosecutors the full story of the terrible events on Christmas Eve in 1991.
The state evaluated that Frank Pauline Jr. and Albert Ian Schweitzer were the main perpetrators, and that Sean Schweitzer had not actually committed the crimes.
Prosecutors accept Schweitzer's offer.
The police took a taped confession from him with a polygraph, which indicated that he was telling the truth.
The mystery of how Dana Ireland met her end is finally solved. Sean says he rode in the back seat with Pauline in the passenger seat, wearing his Jimmy Z t-shirt.
They see, oh, there's that girl. And Pauline says to Ian, the older brother in the front seat, in the driver's seat, hit her, hit her, hit her. And Ian, like a moron, does it and runs her over. Pauline got her into the car, into the passenger seat.
They drive 5 miles to Fisherman's Trail.
Pauline was molesting her, biting her on the breast. Sean said that Pauline raped her. He told Pauline to stop it, but he himself didn't stop it. Sean is saying, get out of here. He's saying to his brother in the driver's seat, get out of here.
Pauline hits Dana with a tire iron.
They just abandoned her to die.
In return for his confession, Sean Schweitzer gets 1 year for kidnapping and manslaughter. With credit for time served, he walks free. His brother does not.
I sentenced him to life in prison with the possibility of parole. It's a mandatory sentencing if you're convicted of that charge.
I don't know if the punishment was severe enough, you know. I don't know. I've just took a long time. That 9 years took a long time.
Frank Pauline and Ian Schweitzer can both still appeal, but their chances of success are slight.
The community, if they didn't audibly breathe a sigh of relief, nevertheless, people were thinking, finally, justice has been done.
After 9 long years, Detective Steve Guillermo can move on.
He's not your superhero that you see on TV, but he's a perfect example of a hard-working, dedicated detective who did virtually everything by the book.
John and Louise Ireland settled their lawsuit against Puna County for its bungled paramedic response. They get $452,000 and create a scholarship fund in Dana's name.
Dana Ireland's parents were very active in reminding the police and prosecutors that they expected fully to have their daughter's killers prosecuted. So they made it a point to not have their daughter forgotten.
4 months after the trial, John dies. Louise follows 3 years later. And though Dana Ireland is gone, she is not forgotten.
Sorry I'm crying, but it's like you think you've been through it and it's over and over and you're not.
Ida Smith hasn't celebrated Christmas since the tragedy.
There'd never be a closure. Never. There's no forgiveness for this. There's peace, but there's no closure.